Vito. That's it. You can't do any more. I think when I was in Bill's session today, he had a one-word greeting, and that's the best I can do. But it is an absolute honor to be here at ICOT 2015, and such an exciting opportunity to be in beautiful Bilbao, Spain. I want to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to share my message with you this afternoon, and I would like to thank you for spending some of your afternoon with me. I'll just have a little disclaimer before I start, because a number of people who have come to previous ICOTs have said, Lane, you know, what are you doing? Are you doing something different? And I said, no. If you've come to previous ICOTs or you know me in terms of my work over the years, you'll know that the thing that I am absolutely most passionate about is teaching children how to learn. It is the nearest and dearest thing to my heart. And so to be given an opportunity to talk with you today for 55 minutes, I had to be quite discerning in the message that was most important for me to send. And because and my core is about teaching kids how to learn, I needed to make that my mission today. If you'd like to know where my thinking has progressed in the last couple of years, then I want to invite you to come tomorrow, where I'll be speaking about deep learning and what it actually means for kids to develop depth of knowledge and understanding. What we can do as educators to actually promote deep thinking strategically and explicitly. Friday, I'm going to focus on something else that's new in terms of what I've done at previous ICOTs, and that's a real focus on the cognitive processing system of the brain. I know it doesn't sound that exciting, but I actually think this research is teacher changing, and I know that means it's learner changing. So on that note, I'm going to kick off with a storybook, and that will set the format for our time together. Well, I was. There we go. You heard this story, Seven Blind Mice by Ed Young. Hands up if you know this story. Okay, you're not to tell the punchline, you people, okay? We're going to leave it for everybody else. Here we go. One day, 7 blind mice were surprised to find a strange something by their pond. Well, what is it? They cried, and they all ran home. On Monday, Red Mouse was the first to set out, and he said, "It's a..." Nobody believed him. On Tuesday, Green Mouse was the second to go, and he said, "Oh, it's a snake." "No," said Yellow Mouse on. I know there's a delay with the translation, but this is a pattern book. We had Monday, and we had Tuesday, and now we're up to Wednesday. Oh, yes. No, said Yellow Mouse on Wednesday. It's a spear. He was the third in turn. Now, the fourth to go was Purple Mouse, and he set out on, and he said, "It's a great cliff." Now, Orange Mouse set out on Friday, and he was the... You're primary educators, aren't you? Because I changed the pattern, and you got that. Orange Mouse set out on Friday, and he was the fifth, and he said, "No, it's a fan. I felt it move." Well, the sixth to go was Blue Mouse, and he set out on Saturday, and he said, "Guys, you're all wrong. It's but a rope." But the others disagreed, and they began to argue, as he-mice will sometimes do. You did notice they were all male mice. And I don't want you to tell me I'm sexist, okay? I didn't write the storybook. I'm just reading it. Sunday, the white mouse, the seventh mouse, and very coincidentally, the she-mouse. When she came up upon that something, she ran up one side, she ran down the other, she ran across that thing from top to top and end to end. "Ooh," said the clever little white mouse, she-mouse. "That's something. It's as sturdy as a... It happened on Monday. I'll just show you the picture. Sturdy as a pillar. It's as supple as a snake. It's as wide as a... Good risk taking. But no. It's as wide as a cliff. It's as sharp as a... It's as breezy as a... It's as stringy as a... But altogether, that something is, girls, don't let me down. This is going well. Where are the pillars? Where's the snake? And the fans? And the cliff? And the spears? And the rope? Well, that is exactly what those other little he-mice said when they ran up one side, ran down the other, ran across that thing from top to top and end to end. Now I see. The mouse moral, knowing in part may make a fine tale, but wisdom comes from seeing the whole. That's it. Aw, that's nice. Aw, mwah. I think we're dealing with so many of the important parts now in education. So if you sort of look at this list, curriculum documents internationally now are recognizing the importance of addressing critical and creative thinking skills. True? And we're seeing it in our classrooms with teachers and learners. Our teachers teaching explicitly the development of thinking skills. We're seeing them infuse thinking dispositions and learning dispositions. They're addressing thinking processes and strategies and routines. And that whole idea of teaching kids how to think skillfully is a critical, critical part. And I think we're doing a great job with some additional parts. We call them the 21st century competencies. Look, some better than others, but I believe, again, in curriculum documents the world over, we're seeing some shift. We're looking at the importance of information and communication skills and digital technologies. We're looking at collaboration. We're looking at life and career and media skills with kids. We're still addressing the traditional content, which is important to do, but we're recognizing some new content. We're looking at global awareness. We're looking at civics literacies and financial literacies. We're looking at environmental and health literacies for our learners. And is that a good thing? Yeah, exactly. But you know what, guys? You don't need to agree because that's not what this is about. But my essence tells me these are important parts, but they're parts. And they're parts of a much, much bigger whole that I'm passionate about. I call it the elephant, but I actually call it teaching our kids how to learn. Many are likely thinking when I say this, well, we teach kids how to learn. What are you going on about? With all due respect, I don't think most teachers teach kids how to learn. I think most teachers teach children about learning. I think we teach them learning skills. I think we teach them study skills and even thinking skills. But I don't believe we're teaching them how to learn. Now, of course, that's debatable, and we're in a thinking conference, so the least I could do is give you a couple of minutes to chat about this. What are the similarities and differences between learning about learning, learning skills, learning study skills, learning thinking skills, and actually learning how to learn? You got about 2 minutes. Get going. Are you, okay, folks, come back. Has anyone had an opportunity? Oh, let me go back there. Had an opportunity to go to Tank Bar? Hands up. Well, you're missing out on something very special. Look, if you're interested in those questions and you want to spend a little bit more time sort of exploring them, I would love you to join me between 4:30 and 4:55 today at Tank Bar. It's, I think, a fantastic inclusion to ICOT 2015. It's an opportunity to explore areas that we focused on within keynote sessions, and we've got some incredibly fun and creative means of reflecting in an interactive way. So if you'd like to join me, that's where I'll be. As I said, I don't think that we're teaching kids how to learn because honestly, if kids were learning how to learn, then kids would know that learning is a process. Do you see what I mean? It's a process. And by definition, processes are stages. So if I was truly teaching kids to learn how to learn, then my kids would be cognizant of the processes or the process of learning and those stages. And the stages that they would experience would be the same stages that we would experience in the real world in adult learning that's independent, self-directed, and autonomous outside of school. If I taught my kids how to learn, then I would enable them and I would empower them to actually go about their day in a much more independent, self-directed manner because they could navigate that process. Now, initially, I would provide that process because they don't know what they don't know. But I don't want kids living a process I designed. I want kids eventually, as they develop some knowledge and understanding, engaging in some critical analysis of the process that's been provided. I want them to engage in deep reflection and evaluative thinking. And I want those kids to work with me to modify it. And then ultimately, you know what I dream? Every single kid on my watch is empowered and enabled to create their own learning process with their own stages and their own stage names that they own and they can bring with them as they leave their formal schooling years. I'm going to talk about 3 wonderings. And these are 3 of my wonderings, 3 of many, many wonderings that have driven my reflection and ultimately driven the pedagogic approach that I believe in for kids. Wondering number 1, is there a difference between knowing and learning? For some people, it's semantics. For me, this was a game changer. How about that one? What does real learning look like? And how does learning in the outside world actually compare with the way learning occurs within schools? I'll start here. I ask teachers that I work with all around the world this question, and we differ, and we should differ. But obviously, understanding my take on this will provide some sort of foundation for you to understand what it is I'm on about. I don't think kids come to school to learn much of anything. I think kids come to school to know stuff. And when they can prove what they know in pointless presentations, in diarrhea dioramas, on tests, essays, and reports, then we move on to the electricity unit so they can find out and know something else. I'm not saying you need to agree with me. I'm talking to you about my thinking. You know, Bill Martin talked today about the fact that your values and beliefs make up your mental model, and your mental model is 100% responsible for what you do and for how you do it. I don't want to paint a nasty picture here because I think we've moved eons in education. I think we're getting kids to find out, explore, and discover better than ever. So, you know, I think about myself as a kid, and I think about not only my primary, but even my secondary education. And, you know, I was given books to find out. I went to the library, I got my 3 books, I put them on my desk, I tried not to plagiarize. Have we moved on? Boy, have we moved on. You know what? I went to some experts, and I visited them on field trips, or they came into me, and kids still do that. But let's look how kids can actually access experts today. They can phone them. They can email them. They can engage in audio-video conferences. They have immediate access to computers and tablets that just opens up the world of information for them. Our kids can find out and explore information through experimentation or through websites, through illustrations. This may not seem like a big deal, but it's a massive deal. We're enabling and empowering kids to find out through so many modalities of strength that didn't used to be an option. And what that actually means is so many more of our kids can receive, which is the precursor to internalization and developing understanding. Back in my day, if you weren't a linguistic kid, you generally found out very little because all the resources we gave were linguistic. So is that a big tick in terms of where we've come? All right. I think we're getting kids to internalize better than ever. When I was a kid, internalization wasn't a big thing. Learning needs to be find out, have some internalized time and lock it in. Find out a little bit more, have some internalized time and lock it in. It's not just internalize. We're giving kids tools and processes, thinking routines that enable them and empower them to make better meaning, deepen their understanding of their learning. And when I think about recording and reporting, and I go back to me as a kid, well, I got to record and report what I knew basically through words, with a pen or a pencil, by the way, after I got my pen license, and some paper. That's pretty much it. But if I think about my kids, yeah, they can still use pens and pencils, they can still use paper. My kids can use computers, they can use software programs. My kids can record their learning auditorily if they think quicker than they speak. My kids can, record and report their learning visually, whether they're using pastel, a paintbrush, or they're using digital images, still images. Is that good? That's fantastic. Because again, back in my day, there were so many kids that did find out and did have understanding, but they couldn't get it out. So many more kids failed the school system than actually needed to. And so I say, you know what, this is beautiful. We've actually got kids finding out better than ever, and we've got them creatively what they learned, and then we start the electricity unit. Things that make you go, I want my kids to find out, and I want my kids to find out through lots of different modalities, and actually I want my kids to choose their finding out tools. I want them to justify their choices. I want kids to be using internalization strategies and tools that enable and empower them to think more deeply about their learning. And I want them to explicitly know what they are so they can self-select them. And I want my kids to be able to record and report what they know so that they know that they're ready to move on. I need them to know they know it. I know I need to know it. Their parents need to know it. But when they know it, I know they know it. Everybody knows they know it. That's not the end of this unit and the start of the electricity unit. That's the springboard for the magic that I call learning. I'm going to say to my kids, fantastic. So you know it? So what? Oh, and I'm not being rude. I'm going to say, how can you actually use what you know to make a difference in your life with people? See, that's why I think I get how amazing learning is. Because when I truly have knowledge and understanding, and I've truly learned something, that means I can use it to make a difference in my life and the life of others. I want kids coming up with solutions to problems that they've identified and recognized. I want them coming up with alternatives and new possibilities. I want them coming up with products and questions. And I want kids inventing the so what. Look, it's actually a noun. It's a thing. The so what is about solutions to problems, alternatives, possibilities, and goals. It's about kids inventing a mission, products, questions, recommendations, plans. Kids creating, designing a future. If kids can predict the future, then if they don't like what they see, what can they do? I can change it. I want to a process, I call it Futurethink, that explicitly walks them through a rigorous series of steps where they gather trends and they identify patterns so that they can predict the future. And then I teach them to evaluate that. What are the strengths and weaknesses? What are you liking? You don't need to be a victim and wait for that to happen. I want kids to use their learning to make a difference in their life and make a difference in the lives of others. Look like? That was question number 2, and this one was number 3. How does learning outside school compare with learning inside school? That's a big Isn't that a Here's my thinking. If I'm preparing kids for their future, not my past, certainly what I do with them when they're with me should remotely resemble what it's they leave. Do you agree? And so when I say what's real learning look like outside of school, and I talk to teachers about the fact that we really need to engage in critical analysis and comparative analysis between what it is and what we're doing, I'm serious about that challenge. And the way to do it is to actually reverse engineer how you learn. Don't set out to try and what learning looks like in the real world. Set out to deconstruct a learning situation that occurred in your life that had nothing to do with formal schooling, that was a magic learning experience for you. Deconstruct it. Where did it start? What did you do next? Did you move back? Did you move forward? What are those stages? Because I guarantee, hand on my heart, if you take me up on that challenge, you'll have a very different picture of what learning looks like out there. And that will provide the foundation to dream the dream about what it could look like within school if we were truly being authentic and we were truly being representational of where we want them one day. For me, I did that deconstruction, and where it brought me was to my elephant. I'm not suggesting that my elephant should be your elephant. We're at a thinking conference, for goodness sakes. But what I'm doing is I'm inviting you to maybe take a bit of a journey with me for the next 35 minutes, to actually think about learning in the real world and think about the idea of perhaps taking up the challenge to deconstruct your learning when you leave me. My elephant, learning's a process. It's got stages. If I want my kids to be independent, self-directed, and autonomous, then my kids need to know what those stages are, and they need to navigate those stages. It can't be a time in the day. It's how they learn. I'm going to walk you through my deconstruction. I know that some of you have heard this story before, and forgive me, but it paints the picture most clearly in terms of how this worked for me and how it could work for you. I said to myself, Self, you want to give your kids a learning process? Where do you want it to start? What do you want that first stage to be? What will it look like? What would it be called? And I said, oh, I know. My first stage could be questioning. No. Because you don't know what you don't know. So how can you have a question about something you've never heard of? Right, so it's not questioning. All right, I got another one. I'm going to start my first stage with an interest, a desire, or a want. What do you think, yeah? No. Because you don't know what you don't know, so how can you be interested in something you've never heard of? Where does it start? It starts with you, as I said, not trying to put a process together. Go to a deconstruction. True story. Many, many moons ago, probably more than 20 now. Deconstruction I did, and it's the deconstruction that started me on a very different pedagogic approach with kids. I had a girlfriend that I met when I was 3, very first girlfriend in my life. We went to primary school together. We went to secondary school together. We went to tertiary together. And after our undergraduate degrees, off she went on her big OE, and I went back into school. She went for 3 months. She went to New Zealand, she went to Australia, and she went to various areas in Asia. And after 3 months, which were, to that point, the longest 3 months of my life, she came home, she phoned me up, she said, "Lane, I'm here." I said, "Get over here. I have missed you so much. The wine's chillin'." So she came over, with like 540 of her photographs before the digital era. I say thank goodness. She put like 10 photo albums on my dining room table, yeah? Can you imagine? Now let's just establish something. Was I interested in her photographs? The first 200. Yeah. Were those photographs relevant to me? They weren't. See, this is the first mistake that I made and many teachers make. Interest and relevance are different animals. Chances are if it's relevant, you will be interested. But just because it's interesting does not make it relevant. And what I know from experience is if all I have is interest with no relevance, when the going gets tough and I'm working on album number 7, what's happening to my interest? I gave her I got through photograph 546. I said, "Don't you dare leave me again." I gave her a kiss and off she went. That was it. Or was it? Because about 3 years later, I was invited to speak in Australia for the first time. Who'd I think of? I phoned her up, Lisa. I said, "Get over here. Bring me those photos. I'm going to Australia." I said, "Don't give me New Zealand." No offense, I'd already been there. "Don't give me Asia." No offense, I'm not going. Bring me. She said, "I don't know where they are." I said, "Find them. The wine's chillin'." It's a bit of a recurring theme. Yes. That whole delayed laughter spins you a little bit. Anyway, so she comes over with those photos. I started to ask her some questions. And in deconstructing this, I learned a lot about questioning, okay? This is true. These are my questions. Are you ready? "Oh my goodness, that's a high bridge. How high was that? Oh, were you scared to climb that bridge? Did it take a lot of time to climb the bridge? How much money did it cost to climb the bridge? Did you have to book in advance to climb the bridge?" At no point did she say, "Lane, those are lower level thinking questions. I'll wait for the laughter." How ridiculous that we think we should control their questions. What if she had said to me, "Lane, those are lower level thinking questions, don't ask them"? What do you think would have happened to my line of questioning? Just saying. You'll be happy I got over the bridge. Not literally. And I started to ask more questions, and I said, "Whoa, here's this picture of her in full scuba diving gear." And I said, "Don't you need some sort of license to dress like that?" And she said, "Oh, yeah. Well, when I was going to Australia and I could dive the Great Barrier Reef, I thought I'd be crazy not to get Part 1 certification." And I said, "The Great Barrier Reef. I'm going to be in this place called Melbourne." I know it's Melbourne. It's like I know it's New Zealand. It's before I went. Yeah. The Spanish won't think that's funny, but you guys from Australia and New Zealand should be laughing Anyway. She said, Lane. She says, in Canada, we have provinces, and in Australia, they have states, and you're going to be in a state called Victoria. The Great Barrier Reef is in a state called Queensland, and she showed me a map. Was I interested in that map? Would I have been 3 years ago? Seriously, here, children, there's a map of China. Get excited, ask some questions. She started to explain that it's not hard to get Part 1 certification. I could do a lot of it online. She talked to me about pool dives. She started to talk to me about where she went on the reef, and all of a sudden, I got this amazing aha. I said to myself, far out, maybe I could dive the barrier reef. You see, I'd been going to New Zealand for 3 years prior to that. I always went to Hawaii or I went to Fiji on the way home. Look, this was an alternative for me, going to Australia. This was a new possibility. Epiphany number 700, and I've just started the unpacking. I was ready to muck. You read something, you hear something, somebody talks about something, you see something. That gives you awareness. The awareness gives you the reflection. And then with the reflection, you say, do I need it? Do I want it? Is there anything in it for me? 3 years prior, there wasn't, was there? But now there was. It's bigger than interest. It's relevance. And guess when kids need to know it? At the beginning of the learning process, not at the end. In the real world of learning, you know your so what before you start learning. It's the reason for the skills. It's the reason for the thinking. It's the reason for the content knowledge. It's the driver. You name me one little kid who learned to get on a bicycle in case one day they decided to ride it. They said, if I could I could get away from you. I could explore some of my world. Yeah, I could have some fun with my friends. I said, how am I going to do this with kids? See, what I say to my teachers is, you don't actually need to know how to do anything. You need to want to do it. Because when you have the will that's deep inside you, guess what you find? You find a way. Look, your way mightn't be my way. It's not meant to be. I'm saying, how am I going to do this? You know what? I made an icon. I gave it a stage name. I'm going to call it Immerse. I'm going to immerse my kids in different colors, different fonts, different sizes, different experiences. And those experiences for me will be tagged to the curriculum documents that I'm mandated to and do not apologize for. I am passionate about curriculum, and I am passionate about rigorous curriculum, and I can get kids excited about anything I have to teach if I contextualize it in their lives. So I'm going to take those immersion experiences that come from my curriculum, and I'm going to contextualize them, and I'm going to teach my kids to be problem finders. I'm going to teach my kids to look for so what possibilities. And I'm going to give my kids the opportunity before they leave this stage to generate their own driver, to generate their own so what. And I popped it on my pathway. What happened next? Well, I said to myself, okay, self, you want to go to the Great Barrier Reef. Well, what do you know and what would you need to know to pull this off? Well, I'm going to need to know when I'm done in Melbourne and when I have to be back in Canada. Do I have time to go to the reef? I know that's a skinny question, people, but it's important. I needed to figure out, more about how to get Part 1, and I need to figure out a little bit more about where I would, how I'd get to Queensland and where I was going to actually stay, and I had to do budgeting. So much that went on here. I said, this stage, this questioning stage, you know what? It's purposeful questions. It's actually authentically strategic questions. If this is what I want to do, what do I know and what would I need to know to pull that off? At no point in time did I need the 5 W's or the H. I didn't need a question starter, I didn't need a question key, nor did I need a question technique. I needed an authentic driver to have questions. How am I going to do this with kids? I created an icon. Kids have been immersed and they have their so what driver. I'm going to say to those kids, well, brainstorm what you know or think you know, and what are you going to need to know to pull this off? Popped it on my pathway. The next thing I did is I moved into planning, and the planning was actually pretty substantial. what thinking do I need to do to actually meet this challenge? I plan my investigations. I'll tell you, Lisa didn't plan my investigations for me. She didn't make my lessons. She didn't make all my activities. As we complain, we have no life. I plan my timelines. I plan my sources of information. I plan my tools for recording, how I would organize and manage information, how I would organize and manage myself, how I would organize and manage my budget. I planned how I would evaluate myself, information, sources. I planned whether I'd use digital tools, non-digital tools, or both. How could I do this with kids? I wasn't 100% sure, but I made an icon. I called it planning, and I popped it on the pathway. What happened next? Well, I moved into a series of investigations. And what I realized at this point in time is that every major inquiry in our lives are actually made up of multiple petite inquiries. Does that make sense? So I wanted to go the barrier reef, but I had this little petite inquiry on how I was going to get there, another one on how to get part one, another one on where I was going to stay. And what I realized is that they all took a different amount of time to complete. They didn't necessarily fit in the term. I know it's very much a primary school teacher thing, but why do we plan units for terms? I want to plan units for learning. That's the only thing that should dictate the timeline. Some of the investigations could be conducted simultaneously, but some had to be sequenced. Every investigation needed different tools for finding out, different tools for recording, different tools for organizing, different tools for evaluating. I'm going to do this with kids. I decided to call this stage the investigate, organize, internalize stage. I wanted kids finding out, organizing their information as they found out, internalizing, moving into a little bit more investigation, organize, a little bit more internalization. So, I did my investigations, and I got to this point where I said to myself, self, what do you now know or think you know about Dive in the Reef? I said, Lane, do you think you're actually ready to take your tests? Are your skills solid? Do you need to move back before you move forward? Who conducted this checkpoint for evaluation? Lisa? Me. Can you see a disconnect in terms of some of our teaching and learning and this real world situation? I decided if I was ready to move forward. And you know what? I don't actually have a problem with tests. Because in this scuba diving example, did I have tests? I had a written test, and if I didn't pass it, I didn't go diving. I had a practical test. But let me go back deeper into this checkpoint, okay? I booked the test, which cost me money. As I was coming close to that test, if I knew I wasn't going to pass, what would I have done? I would have postponed, wouldn't I? Because why would I pay twice? So I'm saying to myself, okay, Lane, you got to revisit this, okay? There's nothing wrong with outside evaluation. I was outside evaluated. You got to tweak the way you're doing it. Could I at this stage, when I think about my kids, obviously, we created a negotiated criteria at the beginning of the learning journey. They had it all the way through the journey. At this stage, could I say to my kids, use that criteria to self-assess against evidence? From 5, my kids use picture-based criteria. So the key here is you don't just self-evaluate, you self-evaluate with evidence. And if you cannot prove with evidence that particular criterion, I'm going to give you the gift to sign up for one of my clinics. It's exciting, isn't it? From the time they're little, they know what clinics I'm holding, and they get the responsibility to recognize what clinics they need to sign into. I called it Stop and Think. I put it on the pathway. Okay, so here's a true story. I took my pool test, I passed. I took the written test, I passed, and they gave me my certificate. Can you see it? Can you see it? Visualize. There it is. Is it beautiful? Lane Clark Scuba Diving Part 1. So guess what I did next? So exciting. I put everything that I learned about scuba diving into this fabulous report with a bibliography and table of contents, and I gave it to Ed. That's my husband. I guess it isn't funny. I didn't do that because you know what? My school, we're really into ICT, leveraging digital technologies. And so you know what we did? I did. I made this amazing multimedia presentation. You would love it. Let me tell you what's in it. I put these animations in it of fish swimming that I made. And I interviewed my coach, put that in there. And I definitely had some maps of the Great Barrier Reef. And I shared it with all of the friends in my class. And then I started the electricity unit. When I got part 1 and I got my certificate, you know what I did? I dove the blessed reef. I did not learn how to dive so I could tell someone about it, but I am. And you know what? I told my dad. I got back on that boat, going back to, the mainland, and I'm on the phone with my dad. At no point did my father worry about my pronunciation, my enunciation, my articulation, and my pacing. Epiphany number 33,000. How are we dealing with communication in children? It's Coco Bloody Loco. Do you have Coco Loco in Spain? Oh. Look, in life, there's 2 types of communication. There's formal and there's informal, and both matter. In fact, what will children engage in more in their life? Formal communication or informal? That's what they need criteria for. Informal communication is actually incredibly difficult. How we engage in a receptive, expressive sort of thing, and how I know that you're confused through body language or facial expressions, how you interject, how I actually shut up long enough for you to interject. These are incredibly important skills. I'm not suggesting that formal communication is not important. What I am suggesting is that we start to contextualize communication with children. See, when you're going to make a difference in your own life, then I guarantee that your communication will be informal. If you love it, you'll tell somebody, and if you didn't like it, you'll tell somebody. And you know what? If you talk too fast, they'll say slow down. But when you're trying to make a difference in somebody else's life, it's a game changer. Now you dot your I's and you cross your T's. And so if I loved part 1 and I took part 2, and then I took my instructors, and then I decided that I am giving up this gig, and I am teaching scuba diving full time, and I made a website, would I need to worry about spelling, grammar, and punctuation on the website? Of course I would. Lane, how are you going to do this stage with kids? 2 things, okay? They knew their so what at the beginning of the process. They're going to act on it now. And once they're ready to act on their so what, they're going to discerningly decide who their audience is, the best communication vehicle for that audience, and whether that communication is formal or informal. This was an interesting stage put in a little after the fact because I think it's neglected and I think it's important. I want my kids to know ideas are actually a dime a dozen. We need to have ideas, we need to implement ideas, and we need to evaluate ideas. The way to evaluate your idea is to act on it and test it. So in my case, my idea was diving the reef. And how was I going to test and monitor it? Well, I was going to do it, and this is what happened. I went down, I freaked out, I came up, I didn't even see a piece of seaweed. And so I said to myself, that's not quite the intended difference I wanted to make. At that point, I say, Lane, do you want to cut your losses now and start the champagne? Or do you want to go back in there and try and swim with fish? Which you'll be happy to know I did. Let me give you a school context. My kids wrote books for little children in Africa that had no books. They sent those books to Africa with a throwaway camera, a self-addressed posted envelope, and a letter. The letter said, we want you to take photos the minute you get these storybooks. We want you to take photos at the end of the first week, third week, and third month. Then we want you to send that camera back to us. We were well and truly on our way in the electricity unit. Were those kids still excited about the camera? See, sometimes learning has a really long tail. That's actually important for kids to recognize. You put your so what into action, and the so what that makes the difference is the innovation. You decide, did I actually do what I intended to do? Do I cut my losses, or do I actually reflect on this and go back in? I celebrated all the way home with champagne, let me tell you. Reoccurring theme. How am I going to do this with kids? Not the champagne part, but definitely the celebration part. Yeah? And I created 2 balloons, one for the innovation, the so what that made the difference, and one for the celebration. Finally, I did a big evaluation. I didn't just evaluate the so what. I evaluated so many other bits around, along the pathway. Would I dive again? Would I actually take part 2? Would I go, back to Australia, or would I try the Caribbean next? I evaluated, would I go back to that hotel? I evaluated how I was going to get there, the coach I had. The end come is the evaluation of the so what. Kids are also going to evaluate their thinking and learning dispositions, their content knowledge, and the process. Made myself an icon, popped it on the pathway. Then I embellished. I've got a lot of teachers now that I'm working with around the world that are creating learning processes that they're using with their kids and using with their schools. If you do this, don't be clever, be real. This has got to be something the children can understand. You've got to not be too sophisticated, but sophisticated enough, which is quite a balance. I'll walk you through a bit of this. I've got a pathway that ebbs and flows, because that's the message I'm telling kids. Sometimes it's thin and sometimes it's fat, but it isn't straight up and down, not ever. You've got stepping stones, and you don't have to start here. You can start anywhere you want. But I want you to know where you are at any point in time, know where you came from and where you'll go next. I want you to know that you can skip stones. But there are points in the process where I want you to make a discerning decision. Do I need to move back before I move forward? Teachers say to me, Lane, learning's not linear. And I say, well, it's not necessarily cyclical. Let me explain. When I finished scuba diving, I could have had so many questions, because the more you know you don't know, that I brought myself way back in here and actually immersed myself in how to get part 2. But I didn't. I took part 1 and I was happy with that. You know what I want kids to know? I want them to know that sometimes you go back into the journey, but sometimes you don't. If you don't, you see that arrow? This learning that you did will go on and affect you for the rest of your life. And I'll tell you why. Because when you have learned something, you've had a structural change in your brain. You've got new dendrites, new dendritic connections, new pathways, and that means with the physiological change in the structure of your brain, nothing you learn after will ever be learned in the same way again. Is that a pretty exciting thing for kids to know? I call it Think Inc., thinking and inquiry, but my kids know it's not an inquiry model. It's a framework for learning how to learn. They'll be immersed. They'll come up with a so what. That so what will drive everything. They'll brainstorm what they know and what they need to know, and based on that, they'll move into their planning. Planning of timelines and sequencing and planning of resources and planning of tools. They'll engage in multiple investigations, and they'll get to a stop and think stage where they are responsible and accountable to make decisions on whether they move back before they move forward. They will be responsible for signing up for personalized clinics that they may need to fill in gaps. They'll implement their select the right audience and the right communication vehicle that they'll justify. They'll test and monitor. They'll put it out there. If it's 3 weeks, if it's 1 minute, they'll wait for a result, and they'll use that to decide next steps. In the meantime, we celebrate to validate, and we do a major evaluation of process and learning. It's explicit, it's transparent, it's black and white, they own it. As they move through the process, they color in. They know, I know, we know where they're at any point in time. One more thing. I can't give you a lot of depth in this, but I do think it's important to try and bring some of the other parts of this conference into this whole, because if it is the elephant, these other parts should exist within it. Here's the stages of their learning. They will plan their learning job at every stage. That won't be done pennies from heaven, whatever they happen to have stored in long-term memory. They'll have a rubric. In fact, developmental progression. That progression is empty. For me, kids place themselves anywhere they want. If it's too easy, they scaffold up. If it's too hard, they scaffold back. They plan their intellectual disposition. Now, a lot of the schools that I work with are also working with habits of mind, but they could just as easily be planning the dispositions that are part of Guy Claxton's work, the dispositions that are part of the work of anybody, quite frankly. It's critical that kids can recognize what dispositions they may need before they even need them. That's not to say it's a fait accompli. I want them responsive in the moment, but I want them in advance about the dispositions that might be necessary at any point in time in the journey. They're going to plan the thinking tools, thinking routines, thinking strategies, thinking processes that they believe will help them at that stage of the learning process. So it looks like this. At any point in time, you can tell me what your learning job is. You can tell me what learning and thinking dispositions you believe you'll need to employ at this stage of the process. You can identify the thinking that's required, and you can select the tools, the strategies, processes, or routines that will enable you to be a great thinker so you can be a great learner, and so on, and so on. I think a lot of teachers claim that they're teaching kids how to learn. I think they're teaching them about learning. I think they're teaching them learning skills. I think they're teaching them study skills and even thinking skills, and they matter. They critically matter. But I want kids to learn that learning is a process. And because it's a process, it has stages. Once they're cognizant of those stages, they can own it. They can navigate them. Ultimately, I want them to evaluate and modify the process I give them until they're enabled and empowered to create their own. I think I can teach kids how to learn. And if I do, I'll prepare them for their future and not my past. I'll move them from knowing to learning. I'll authentically, with those kids, infuse the 21st century skills into my practice and into their learning. And I reckon I'll ignite those kids, engage those kids, enable them, and empower them. Because I think I'll have the elephant. Thank you.